Willowbrook Glen wasn't merely presented as a place to live, it was aggressively marketed as an experience, a carefully engineered ecosystem of tranquil predictability and aesthetic conformity. Life here unfolded along sidewalks so immaculate they seemed buffed nightly, bordered by lawns displaying an almost unnervingly uniform shade of deep emerald green. The landscaping, a subject of intense HOA scrutiny, adhered strictly to a pre-approved list of non-invasive, aesthetically subdued flora. Anything too vibrant or exotic was swiftly rooted out. Presiding over this enforced serenity, naturally, was the Homeowners Association, its power codified in a rulebook bound in imposing faux leather, thick and heavy enough to serve as ballast for a small yacht. Within its densely printed pages, filled with subsections and appendices, lay the gospel of Willowbrook living. This sacred text governed everything imaginable, from the precise Sherwin-Williams color codes deemed acceptable for mailbox paint. Navajo white was preferred, eggshell white barely tolerated. Anything bolder constituted a near-existential threat to the mandated hours for lawn maintenance and the minimum acceptable distance between ornamental garden gnomes precisely 6 feet apart, mandated orientation facing streetward. Stylistic variations subject to committee pre-approval. It was a place where order wasn't merely valued, it was fetishized, worshipped as the ultimate good. Yet, beneath this placid, almost sterile surface of meticulously maintained perfection, human tensions, like invasive weeds, could inevitably simmer. These undercurrents were often stoked, deliberately or inadvertently, by the unwavering convictions and forceful personality of Diane Schumacher. Diane, a woman whose tightly controlled blonde bob seemed sculpted from spun glass, utterly impervious to wind, humidity, or dissenting opinions, was a prominent, undeniably vocal figure on the HOA board. Her official title involved chairing the landscaping committee, but her sphere of influence and self-perceived authority extended far further, touching nearly every aspect of community life. She possessed an unshakable, almost religious faith that the preservation, indeed, the enhancement of property values was the ultimate, paramount objective, trumping nearly all other considerations, including, it often seemed to observers, basic empathy. Common sense, or simple human decency. Diane harbored a particular, deeply ingrained aversion, bordering on phobia, towards pets, especially larger dogs. She didn't see companions or family members. She saw inherently messy, potentially destructive, noise-producing liabilities, four-legged vectors of chaos, threatening the neighborhood's pristine aesthetic and, by direct, immutable correlation in her mind, its precious, ever-escalating financial worth. Dr. Evelyn Reed, one of Willowbrook Glen's newer residents, represented a particular, deeply vexing challenge to Diane's rigidly ordered vision of suburban perfection. Evelyn was, on the surface, almost an ideal neighbor by Willowbrook's exacting standards, exceptionally quiet, analytical to a fault, clearly professionally successful, though the precise nature of her demanding, often classified, profession remained vague to most, and she largely kept to herself, avoiding neighborhood gossip circles and overly chummy block parties. These qualities might normally have rendered her practically invisible, a perfectly acceptable, unobtrusive presence in the community's carefully curated social landscape. However, Evelyn was rarely, if ever, truly alone. By her side, a constant, grounding, steady presence was Ranger. Ranger was, even to the most casual or canine indifferent observer, a truly magnificent animal, a German shepherd of impeccable working lineage. His sable coat gleamed with health, His posture radiated quiet confidence, alert but relaxed, and his intelligent amber eyes seemed to observe the world with an unnerving, focused calm that hinted at deep wells of training and innate stability. He moved with a fluid, quiet grace that belied his substantial size and coiled strength. Ranger wasn't merely a pet, a companion animal enjoyed for leisure. The clearly marked, professional-looking vest he wore consistently during their frequent walks, emblazoned with service dog, do not pet, identified him unequivocally as a PTSD assistance animal. Evelyn, a decorated Army veteran whose quiet intensity and perpetually watchful eyes hinted at traumatic experiences she never discussed, relied utterly on Ranger's unwavering presence and highly trained, specialized intuition. He was her lifeline, her anchor in the often turbulent waters of memory and hypervigilance. He was trained to recognize the subtle physiological cues signaling the onset of flashbacks or severe anxiety attacks, providing grounding pressure or leading her to a quiet space before she became overwhelmed. He was her early warning system for environmental triggers she couldn't always anticipate in the unpredictable civilian world. He was her silent, steadfast partner in navigating the demanding, often emotionally brutalizing landscape she inhabited daily as a lead criminal profiler for the FBI's Elite Behavioral Analysis Unit (BAU) at Quantico, a job that required her to immerse herself in the darkest corners of the human psyche, dissecting violence and predicting chaos. Ranger's steady presence beside her, both at home and sometimes discreetly at the office, allowed her to function at an elite level, to work effectively, to live something resembling a normal life amidst the psychological shrapnel of war and the relentless daily confrontation with humanity's most depraved impulses. He wasn't a luxury, he was a necessity, as vital to her well-being as insulin to a diabetic. Diane Schumacher, predictably, made no attempt whatsoever to conceal her profound disapproval of this human-animal partnership residing within her carefully controlled domain. From the very moment Evelyn and Ranger moved into the modest but well-kept brick colonial down the street, Diane subjected them to a relentless campaign of low-grade hostility, a death-by-a-thousand-cuts strategy designed to make them feel unwelcome. Hostile stares that lingered unnervingly followed them on their daily walks, pointed remarks, ostensibly general observations about large animals or liability concerns, but clearly targeted, were dropped like small, passive-aggressive grenades into otherwise bland HOA meetings. Anonymous notes, typed on plain paper and unsigned, though the phrasing and specific complaints bore Diane's unmistakable stylistic fingerprint, mysteriously appeared tucked under Evelyn's mailbox flag, complaining about non-existent barking incidents during the day, or alleging Ranger had somehow disturbed carefully arranged decorative gravel near the sidewalk during a nighttime walk impossible, as Ranger was always leashed and under Evelyn's direct control. Once, Diane escalated from passive aggression to direct confrontation. She timed it perfectly, stepping out suddenly from behind her perfectly pruned, unnaturally symmetrical rhododendrons, just as Evelyn and Ranger returned from their afternoon walk, effectively blocking the sidewalk path. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line, a posture radiating righteous indignation. "Dr. Reed," she began, her voice tight, sharp, laced with poorly concealed animosity. "I must insist that you keep that animal." The slight pause, the emphasis, dripped with contempt. "Further away from the community flower beds near the curb. We spend a significant amount of the association's budget maintaining those annual plantings to precise aesthetic standards." Evelyn met Diane's hostile gaze calmly, her own expression carefully neutral, betraying none of the internal weariness this constant scrutiny provoked. She felt a familiar tightening in her chest. A low-level hum of the hypervigilance ranger usually helped her manage. This is a highly trained assistance animal. Miss Schumacher, Evelyn replied, her voice level, professional, the voice she used when dealing with difficult subjects in interview rooms. She gestured briefly, almost imperceptibly, towards Ranger's clearly marked vest. Ranger himself, sensing the tension but trained for neutrality, sat patiently by Evelyn's side, observing Diane with his characteristic unnerving, intelligent stillness. He is essential for managing a documented disability related to my military service. He is always leashed, always under my direct control, and poses absolutely no threat whatsoever to your flower beds or community standards. Service animal or not, it's still a large dog, Diane had retorted dismissively, her gaze flicking contemptuously over Ranger, refusing to acknowledge his vest or purpose. They carry diseases. They shed excessively. They inevitably lower the tone, the quality, of a neighborhood like this. She paused, leaning forward slightly, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, condescending whisper. Frankly, Dr. Reed, I find it difficult to understand why someone requiring such assistance, the word hung in the air, laden with judgment, would choose to live in a community with the high standards, the expectations of Willowbrook Glen. Perhaps a different type of neighborhood would be more suitable for your needs. Evelyn, whose entire professional life revolved around dissecting the motivations, pathologies, and behavioral patterns of individuals capable of far greater harm, recognized the psychological landscape immediately. The barely veiled prejudice masquerading as legitimate community concern, the deep-seated lack of empathy, the utter inability, or perhaps willful refusal to comprehend experiences or perspectives outside her own narrow, privileged frame of reference, the rigid dichotomous, black and white thinking, devoid of nuance or compassion, the obsessive focus on superficial order and control as a defense mechanism against perceived chaos or personal inadequacy, the dangerous potential for disproportionate, even aggressive, escalation when that fragile sense of order felt threatened or defied. It was a psychological profile she understood all too well, a pattern often seen, albeit usually in a far more lethal context, in the subjects she studied, arguing with Diane, attempting to educate her about the ADA or the FHA. Appealing to reason or empathy, Evelyn knew instantly it would be utterly pointless, likely counterproductive. It would be like trying to reason with a brick wall, a beautifully maintained, HOA-approved brick wall, but a brick wall nonetheless. She chose, instead, the path of tactical disengagement, the strategy she often employed in high-stress situations. Control what you can control, minimize exposure, avoid unnecessary conflict. She meticulously followed every single HOA rule regarding pet ownership, immediate waste disposal in designated receptacles, strict adherence to leash laws, ensuring absolute quiet during mandated hours, ensuring Ranger was never, ever a genuine nuisance by any objective measure, giving Diane no legitimate ammunition for formal complaints. She adjusted their walking routes to minimize any potential encounters. She hoped, perhaps optimistically, that Diane's animosity, deprived of fuel, starved of reaction, would eventually wither and fade into the background radiation of unavoidable neighborhood annoyances. She underestimated the depth of Diane Schumacher's resentment. She underestimated the obsessive nature of her perceived grievance. And she tragically underestimated the potential for calculated, deliberate cruelty that could ultimately breed in such a rigidly controlled, empathy-deficient mind. The escalation. when it finally came, wasn't heralded by warning shots or further passive-aggressive notes. It arrived with the swift, unexpected, brutal finality of a hidden explosive device. It happened on a crisp, perfect autumn afternoon. The sky was a piercing, cloudless blue, the air sharp and clean with the scent of fallen leaves and the distant, nostalgic smell of wood smoke curling from unseen chimneys. Evelyn and Ranger returned from their usual late afternoon walk, a long, circuitous route Evelyn had carefully mapped out, consciously choosing streets that provided the widest possible berth around Diane's property, minimizing even accidental proximity. Ranger seemed perfectly fine initially. He trotted happily inside, tail wagging, pausing for a long drink of water from his bowl, then padded into Evelyn's home office and curled up contentedly on his designated orthopedic bed near her desk. Evelyn, shedding her light jacket, poured herself a cup of coffee, the comforting aroma filling the quiet room. She settled down at her desk, ready to immerse herself in the complex, disturbing details of a particularly challenging active case file, a series of unsolved disappearances across state lines bearing chillingly similar, ritualistic signatures. An hour, perhaps 90 minutes, passed in focused, productive quiet. The only sounds were the soft click of Evelyn's keyboard, the rustle of papers, the gentle rhythm of Ranger's breathing from his bed. Then, abruptly, the quiet shattered. Ranger let out a low, guttural whine, a sound utterly unlike his usual repertoire of contented sighs or sleepy snorts. It was a sound of distress. Evelyn looked over immediately, her brow furrowing in concern. "What's wrong, buddy?" He shifted restlessly on his bed, his ears flat against his head. Then he began to tremble, subtly at first, a fine tremor rippling through his powerful frame, then escalating rapidly into violent, uncontrollable shaking. His breathing grew ragged, shallow, labored, before Evelyn could even fully process the terrifyingly rapid deterioration, before she could cross the room to him. He scrambled unsteadily to his feet, stumbled sideways as if drunk, his coordination failing, and began to retch violently, his entire body convulsing with the force of it, expelling a thick, yellowish, foamy substance onto the oriental rug. Panic, cold, sharp, and absolute, pierced through Evelyn's carefully constructed professional composure, like a shard of ice driven straight into her heart. Her BAU training, the ingrained habit of detached analysis, warred momentarily with the raw, visceral terror of watching her beloved companion, her lifeline, collapse before her eyes. But the training won, asserting control over the panic. Her mind automatically began assessing the symptoms, cataloging them with chilling speed. Rapid onset, minutes, not hours. Severe neurological signs, trembling, ataxia, disorientation. Severe gastrointestinal distress, violent vomiting. Respiratory compromise imminent. The diagnostic checklist pointed overwhelmingly, terrifyingly, to one conclusion: poisoning. Acute, severe poisoning. The certainty slammed into her with the force of a physical blow, stealing her breath. She didn't hesitate. There was no time for indecision, for recrimination. Not yet. Action was critical. Scooping the large, now whimpering, barely responsive dog into her arms, adrenaline flooding her system, lending her a strength she didn't know she possessed. She half carried, half dragged his heavy, limp form out to her parked car. Her mind raced, cycling through potential toxins, rodenticides, pesticides, household chemicals, antifreeze. The symptoms fit ethylene glycol toxicity disturbingly well. Prognosis flashed through her head, guarded to poor, depending on the dose and time to treatment. Logistical challenges, Nearest 24-hour emergency vet. Fastest route. Calling ahead. Even amidst the swirling terror, she found herself whispering reassurances to Ranger, her voice tight, strained, trying to project a calm that felt like a grotesque lie. She laid him as carefully as possible across the back seat, instinctively grabbing an old towel from the trunk to protect the upholstery, a strangely mundane, automatic thought amidst the unfolding nightmare. She slammed the door, jumped into the driver's seat, fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking, and sped out of her driveway, tires squealing faintly on the quiet suburban asphalt, heading towards the Willowbrook Veterinary Emergency Center, praying with a desperation she hadn't felt since her darkest days overseas that she wasn't already too late. The scene inside the Willowbrook Veterinary Emergency Center was a maelstrom of controlled chaos, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood, the sharp scent of antiseptic, and the almost palpable miasma of animal fear and human desperation. The moment Evelyn stumbled through the automatic doors, half carrying, half dragging Ranger's increasingly unresponsive form, shouting emergency. Suspected poisoning. Service dog. He's barely breathing. The brightly lit reception area dissolved into a blur of focused, urgent motion. Veterinary technicians in scrubs materialized instantly, their faces grim but professional. They assessed Ranger rapidly, expertly lifted his heavy, limp form onto a rolling gurney, and rushed him back through swinging double doors towards the critical care treatment area. Evelyn, finding herself suddenly alone, shoved slightly aside in the controlled whirlwind of the response, leaned heavily against a cool, sterile wall, trying to catch her breath, trying to force her racing heart back into a semblance of normal rhythm, trying to process the horrifying reality of the situation. She provided Ranger's pertinent medical history, age, weight, known allergies, current medications, to the head emergency veterinarian, a calm, capable-looking woman with tired eyes named Dr. Ramirez. Evelyn forced her voice to remain tight, clipped, professional, delivering the information with the precision she used when briefing a case, suppressing the tremor that threatened to betray her rising terror. Even now, amidst the personal crisis, her profiler's mind couldn't help but automatically catalog details, the specific brands of the fourth pumps and monitoring equipment being wheeled into the treatment room. The subtle stress lines etched around Dr. Ramirez's eyes, the hushed, urgent tones of the technicians calling out vital signs. After what felt like an agonizing eternity, but was likely only 15 or 20 minutes, time warping and stretching in the crucible of crisis, Dr. Ramirez emerged from the treatment area, pulling off soiled surgical gloves, her expression grim, confirming Evelyn's worst fears. Evelyn gripped the edge of the reception counter, her knuckles turning white, bracing herself for the verdict. "It's poison, Dr. Reed," Dr. Ramirez confirmed, her voice low, serious, meeting Evelyn's gaze directly. "We've induced further vomiting, started aggressive the fourth fluid therapy, and initiated gastric decontamination protocols with activated charcoal. But based on the clinical presentation, the extremely rapid onset of severe neurological symptoms, the profound gastrointestinal distress, the preliminary blood work showing dangerously elevated kidney enzymes indicating acute kidney injury, it's almost certainly ethylene glycol toxicity, antifreeze poisoning." She paused, letting the diagnosis sink in. And given the documented timeline, the extremely rapid onset occurring less than 2 hours after your walk, the severity of the symptoms upon arrival, this presentation is highly inconsistent with accidental ingestion of a small environmental spill outdoors. The concentration ingested had to be significant. Her gaze sharpened slightly. Dr. Reed. In my professional opinion, someone gave this to him, deliberately, likely mixed with something highly palatable, something attractive to dogs like meat or peanut butter, specifically to ensure rapid and complete ingestion. Deliberately. The word hung in the sterile, brightly lit waiting room, heavy, obscene. Someone intentionally, calculatedly, poisoned Ranger. Evelyn felt a wave of sickening nausea rise violently in her throat. She swallowed it down, the acrid taste mingling with the metallic tang of fear. The nausea was instantly suppressed, replaced by a surge of icy diamond-hard fury, a cold rage that paradoxically sharpened her focus. Her analytical mind, the finely honed instrument she used to dissect the twisted motivations of serial killers and violent offenders, clicked instantly into high gear, overlaying her profound personal grief and terror with the cold, dispassionate logic of behavioral analysis. Motive, who harbored significant, openly expressed animosity towards Ranger, viewing him as a nuisance and a threat to their perceived order. Diane Schumacher. Opportunity, who had potential access to Ranger during or immediately after their afternoon walk. Their established route, even the modified one, passed near enough to the edge of Diane's property line for something toxic, disguised as a treat, to be tossed into the grass or left strategically near the sidewalk, where Ranger might encounter it. Means antifreeze is ubiquitous, readily available, easily disguised in food, highly toxic to canines even in small doses, and produces exactly the symptoms Ranger exhibited. Behavioral indicators. Diane exhibited classic traits often associated with individuals capable of premeditated harm driven by obsession or perceived grievance, obsessive focus on control and order, rigid black and white thinking, demonstrated escalating hostility when challenged or ignored, a profound lack of empathy, a history of passive-aggressive and confrontational behavior. The profile fit, disturbingly, chillingly well. As the dedicated veterinary team fought desperately in the back room to save Ranger's life, pumping his stomach repeatedly, administering activated charcoal to absorb residual toxin, pushing massive amounts of the fourth fluids to try and flush his kidneys, administering the specific, expensive antidote for ethylene glycol poisoning Fompazole, monitoring his failing kidneys and dangerously irregular heart rhythm, placing him on oxygen support. Evelyn stumbled outside into the cool, indifferent night air. She needed space. She needed to breathe air that didn't smell of antiseptic and impending death. She needed to think. The sheer, calculated cruelty of the act struck her again, this time with the force of a physical blow, making her stagger slightly. To intentionally inflict such agonizing, potentially lethal suffering on any living creature was abhorrent. To do it to a service animal, an animal specifically trained, selected, and relied upon to help someone heal from the invisible wounds of trauma, an animal that represented safety, stability, and unconditional loyalty to its handler. It spoke of a profound malignancy, a chilling lack of conscience, a callous disregard for life that bordered on the psychopathic. This wasn't just an attack on Ranger, her loyal companion. It felt like a deeply personal, vicious assault on Evelyn herself, on her vulnerability, on her past service, on her very right to exist peacefully in this community with the medical support she required and deserved. She stood shivering slightly under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of the veterinary hospital parking lot, the distant sound of late-night traffic a low, continuous hum beneath the frantic, terrified beating of her own heart. She took several deep, deliberately steadying breaths, forcing the panicked owner back into the shadows, allowing the trained FBI profiler, the cool analyst, back into the driver's seat. Emotion was a dangerous liability now. Clear-headed. Decisive action was required. She pulled out her secure work phone, her fingers surprisingly steady now, fueled by cold fury. She made two crucial phone calls. The first was to her direct supervisor, the unit chief of the BAU at Quantico, a man who understood pressure, respected Evelyn's abilities, and knew the unique challenges faced by his agents, both on and off duty. "Chief," she said, her voice low, strained, but utterly controlled. "Reed, I have a critical personal emergency," she quickly, concisely summarized the situation. "My assistant's animal, Ranger, he's been poisoned, deliberately, according to the attending veterinarian." She relayed the suspected toxin, ethylene glycol, and Ranger's critical condition. "Prognosis is extremely guarded." She paused, taking another breath. "Chief, I have a strong suspect, a neighbor with a documented history of escalating harassment targeting both me and Ranger." She provided Diane Schumacher's name and address. The behavioral profile fits premeditated action fueled by obsessive grievance. Another pause. "Chief, I need bureau resources. Can we get an expedited forensic analysis run at the lab on biological samples? The vet is currently collecting vomitus, blood, urine. I also secured potential physical evidence. A suspicious meatball found near our walking path shortly after the likely time of ingestion. I bagged it using evidence protocols. Need that tested ASAP. Priority handling. I need confirmation, documentation, chain of custody." There was a tacit, unspoken understanding within the Bureau. A professional courtesy often extended in urgent, critical situations, especially when involving an agent, a potentially violent crime, even one targeting an animal, especially a service animal, and the potential, however remote, for federal jurisdiction, if malice against a federal officer could be clearly inferred or proven. Her chief, after a moment of stunned, angry silence, assured her he would make the necessary calls immediately, authorize the lab request, grease whatever bureaucratic wheels needed greasing. "Take care of your partner. Reed," he'd said, his voice gruff with concern. "We'll handle the support." Her second call was to the non-emergency line of the local county police department. She formally reported the incident, requesting an officer be dispatched immediately to the veterinary hospital to take her statement and officially initiate a criminal investigation. She provided the details calmly, factually, classifying the incident clearly as a suspected felony animal cruelty case under the relevant state statute. She mentally cited the specific code section. She provided Diane Schumacher's name and address as a person of significant interest, detailing the documented history of harassment, briefly summarizing her professional assessment of Diane's behavioral indicators, suggesting motive and intent, and mentioning the potential physical evidence she had secured the meatball and the biological samples being collected by the veterinary staff. She requested the responding officer coordinate directly with Dr. Ramirez regarding evidence collection and chain of custody protocols. She hung up, her hand gripping the phone tightly. The cold plastic, a stark contrast to the burning rage and fear coiling within her. Over the next agonizing 48 hours, Ranger remained in the veterinary ICU, clinging precariously to life, hooked up to a bewildering array of whirring machines, multiple the fourth lines delivering a constant stream of fluids and medications, a urinary catheter measuring the scant output from his damaged kidneys, and continuous cardiac and respiratory monitoring equipment. He remained largely unresponsive, his powerful body locked in a desperate, silent battle against the ravages of the ingested toxin. Evelyn rarely left his side. She dozed fitfully, intermittently, in a hard, uncomfortable plastic chair pushed into a corner of the small, sterile ICU waiting room. The constant, rhythmic beeping and occasional urgent alarms from the monitors forming a grim, relentless soundtrack to her vigil. Whenever the veterinary staff permitted, she would slip quietly into his specially constructed, oxygenated enclosure, careful not to disturb the lines and tubes. She'd sit on the floor beside him, whispering quiet words of encouragement, her hand resting gently on his still, warm form, willing him to fight, to survive, drawing a strange measure of strength herself from the faint, steady rise and fall of his chest. Her analytical mind, however, the profiler's relentless pattern-seeking engine, never fully shut down. During the long, quiet hours, she replayed the events leading up to the poisoning, meticulously analyzed Diane's known behavior, dissected her likely motivations, considered potential investigative angles and pitfalls. The profiler working subconsciously even as the terrified veteran feared losing her most trusted, loyal companion. Simultaneously, beyond the hushed, antiseptic walls of the veterinary hospital, the wheels of the official criminal inquiry began to turn, their momentum significantly accelerated by the involvement and resources of the FBI local police Detective Miller, a solid, experienced investigator assigned primary responsibility for the case, conducted a formal, recorded interview with Diane Schumacher at her immaculate Willowbrook Glen home. Diane, initially presenting a carefully rehearsed facade of shocked, surprised innocence poisoned. Oh, how dreadful! Was it something he ate in the park? Quickly became indignant, then defensively belligerent under Miller's calm, persistent, probing questioning. She vehemently, repeatedly denied any involvement, her voice rising sharply, tinged with hysteria. This is absolutely absurd, a complete fabrication. I would never harm an animal, she insisted, her hand fluttering nervously to her throat, perhaps a little too forcefully, a classic indicator of deception. She then abruptly pivoted, attempting to cast suspicion back onto Evelyn, the victim. Frankly, detective, she leaned forward conspiratorially, lowering her voice. I wouldn't be surprised if she did something herself. People involved in that kind of work, profiling criminals, they see terrible things. Maybe she's the unstable one. Maybe she's trying to get attention, looking for sympathy. Or maybe, more likely, the dog simply ate something toxic because she wasn't watching it properly on their walk. You know, these service animals aren't always as well behaved as they claim. Her denials felt brittle, overly rehearsed. Her clumsy attempt to deflect blame onto the victim, combined with her visible agitation, fidgeting hands, and micro-expressions of contempt flickering across her face when discussing Evelyn and Ranger, were all duly noted by the experienced detective. Her body language, her verbal parries, screamed deception to Miller. Meanwhile, utilizing the professional courtesy chain activated by Evelyn's unit chief, the FBI laboratory at Quantico fast tracked the forensic analysis. The suspicious, half-eaten meatball Evelyn had carefully collected from the grass near their walking path, preserving potential DNA or fingerprint evidence, along with the biological samples vomitus, blood. Urine rushed via priority courier from the veterinary hospital, arrived at the lab. Toxicologists and trace evidence examiners worked quickly, prioritizing the case. The results, returned electronically within 36 hours, were conclusive and utterly damning. The meatball contained massive, lethal concentrations of ethylene glycol, positively identified as the primary toxic component of common automotive antifreeze. Deliberately mixed into cooked ground beef, clearly intended as bait. The biological samples from Ranger confirmed profound systemic absorption of the same specific toxin. The detailed lab report even noted the specific chemical signature of the ethylene glycol, consistent with a popular, readily available brand of antifreeze sold nationwide. Armed with this definitive forensic confirmation, the joint investigation kicked into high gear. The assisting FBI special agent, liaising closely with Detective Miller, suggested leveraging bureau resources to check recent purchase records, a standard investigative technique in poisoning cases. A quick, targeted electronic canvass of major local auto parts stores and big box retailers, cross-referencing security footage logs and point-of-sale transaction data against Diane Schumacher's known vehicle descriptions and, where available, credit card information obtained via a rapidly issued judicial subpoena based on the rapidly mounting probable cause, yielded the crucial corroborating link, crystal clear, time-stamped security footage from a nearby AutoZone store, dated just 2 days before Ranger was poisoned, showed Diane Schumacher, unmistakable in her usual tailored slacks and crisp blouse, purchasing 2 large, 1-gallon jugs of the exact brand and formulation of antifreeze identified by the FBI lab in the Meatball and Ranger's system. She had paid in cash, perhaps a feeble attempt to avoid a digital trail, but the high-resolution video captured her face, her vehicle entering and leaving the parking lot, and the specific items purchased at the register. The timestamp perfectly aligned with the window of opportunity. The investigative triangle was now complete, the evidence compelling, forming an inescapable circumstantial net. Motive: clearly demonstrated animosity, escalating harassment. Obsessive personality traits. Means: confirmed purchase of the specific lethal agent used just prior to the incident. Opportunity: proximity to the victim's walking route and timing, consistent with the poisoning timeline. Forensic proof: positive identification of the specific poison in both the delivery medium adulterated bait and the victim animal's biological samples. Behavioral indicators: documented history of hostility, deceptive statements, and attempts to deflect blame during the formal police interview. Working jointly, Detective Miller and the assisting FBI special agent meticulously compiled the comprehensive case file, ensuring every piece of evidence was documented, every statement verified, every legal standard met. They presented their findings formally to the county prosecutor's office. The assistant district attorney, assigned to review the case, presented with the clear timeline, the definitive forensic evidence, the incriminating security footage, the corroborating witness statements including Evelyn's detailed account, and her unique professional assessment of the offender's likely mindset, and the police reports detailing Diane's deceptive behavior during questioning. Immediately recognized the overwhelming strength of the case. There was no room for reasonable doubt. An arrest warrant was drafted, charging Diane Schumacher with felony aggravated animal cruelty under the state statute, a serious offense carrying significant penalties, further enhanced by factors such as the calculated use of poison, the premeditated nature of the act, and the status of the victim animal as a service dog assisting a disabled veteran. Given the calculated nature of the crime, the deliberate use of a lethal poison, Diane's increasingly erratic and deceptive behavior when confronted by authority, and the involvement of a federal agent as the primary victim, technically raising potential, albeit low, risk factors for unpredictable behavior upon arrest. The decision was made by supervising law enforcement officials from both agencies to execute the arrest warrant with a heightened degree of caution and tactical preparedness. An FBI special agent team was formally assigned, under existing Joint Task Force protocols, to assist local PD in the warrant service to ensure officer safety, maintain scene security, and guarantee procedural correctness given the federal nexus. Early the next morning, under a sky the color of bruised plums that threatened a cold, spitting rain, the carefully manufactured tranquility of Willowbrook Glen was irrevocably shattered once again. This time, it wasn't just the familiar flashing blue lights of local police cruisers disturbing the pre-dawn quiet, but the more ominous, purposeful presence of dark, unmarked FBI sedans and a clearly marked FBI evidence response team vehicle converging silently, efficiently, on Diane Schumacher's immaculate brick colonial residence. Federal agents, easily identified by their dark blue jackets, emblazoned with bold yellow FBI lettering or tactical vests worn discreetly over business attire, along with uniformed local police officers, took up strategic positions, creating a secure, inescapable perimeter around the house with practiced, unobtrusive professionalism. The deployment was swift, quiet, but carried an undeniable weight of serious federal authority that fundamentally altered the neighborhood's usual placid atmosphere. Neighbors, perhaps becoming unfortunately accustomed to unusual police activity on their normally placid street, peered cautiously out from behind expensive blinds and custom draperies, their morning coffee routines definitively interrupted. Whispers likely spread like wildfire via neighborhood text chains and hushed phone calls. What now? Is it the dog woman again? FBI. What on earth did she do? The lead FBI special agent, a tall, no-nonsense veteran agent, flanked closely by Detective Miller and two uniformed local officers providing visible police presence, approached the pristine front door. The agent knocked firmly. A sharp, authoritative rap that echoed slightly in the still morning air. Knock, knock, knock. Diane Schumacher. Police and FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest. Open the door. The command was loud, clear, professional, leaving absolutely no room for misunderstanding or negotiation. Lights flickered on inside the meticulously kept house. After a tense moment of charged silence, the front door opened just a crack, secured by a heavy brass chain. Diane Schumacher peered out, her face pale and puffy in the dim morning light, her eyes wide, darting nervously between the FBI agent and the uniformed officers. Her perfectly coiffed blonde bob was slightly askew, flattened on one side from sleep. A warrant. Her voice trembled slightly, laced with disbelief. For what? Is this about that ridiculous, frivolous HOA complaint I filed last week about their overgrown shrubbery? Ma'am, you are under arrest for felony animal cruelty, the lead FBI agent stated calmly, professionally, holding up his gold credentials and the folded warrant for her to see through the crack. Detective Miller stood beside him, his expression grim, unreadable. Please unchain the door and step outside slowly with your hands visible where we can see them. Animal cruelty, Diane shrieked. The sound high-pitched, incredulous, cracking with disbelief and rising panic. She tried to push the heavy door closed against the agent's foot, now subtly blocking it. That's preposterous, slanderous. It was just a dog, a dangerous nuisance animal. It didn't belong here. It was lowering property values, threatening the children. You can't arrest me for protecting my investment, for upholding community standards. This is harassment. Her outburst, a spontaneous, self-incriminating torrent of justifications laced with revealing invective, was clearly audible and duly noted by all officers present, likely captured on body-worn cameras, as she actively attempted to slam the door shut. Resisting the lawful command, the agents reacted instantly, utilizing standard procedure for resisting arrest. They forced the door open swiftly, professionally, overcoming her futile resistance. They moved inside quickly to secure her. Sounds of a brief struggle, shrill protests, and firm commands emanated from within the house's pristine interior. Neighbors emerged onto their porches and lawns now, drawn by the undeniable commotion, witnessing the almost unbelievable, surreal sight of Diane Schumacher, the self-proclaimed arbiter of Willowbrook Glen's impeccable standards, the unwavering stickler for rules and appearances, the terror of non-compliant mailboxes, being firmly led out of her perfect house in handcuffs by stern-faced FBI agents and local police officers, news crews, alerted by police scanners picking up the unusual FBI assisting local PD, felony warrant service at residential address call, and likely tipped off by sources sensing a high-profile story with compelling visuals. Arrived just as she was being guided, still protesting loudly, incoherently, "This is illegal. My lawyer will hear about this. It was just a dog," towards the back of Detective Miller's unmarked police vehicle. Her face, captured in the harsh, unforgiving glare of the news cameras already rolling, was a mask of incandescent fury, bewildered indignation, and the dawning, terrifying comprehension of her new reality. Her meticulously ordered world, built on rules and exclusion, had just violently, publicly collapsed. The story, like the others before it involving HOA figures crossing critical legal and moral lines, became an instant media sensation, amplified significantly by the direct FBI involvement in the arrest. The sympathetic status of the victim as both a decorated combat veteran and a federal agent, and the particularly heart-wrenching element of a beloved, highly trained PTSD service dog being deliberately poisoned. FBI arrests HOA board member for poisoning FBI profiler's PTSD service dog. Variations of the headline screamed across news platforms and social media feeds. The public reaction was intense, visceral, and overwhelmingly condemnatory. Animal lovers, veterans advocacy groups, disability rights organizations, and the general public flooded news comment sections, online forums, and social media platforms with expressions of profound outrage, demanding swift and severe justice for Diane Schumacher. Her name, overnight, became synonymous with calculated cruelty and unchecked neighborhood tyranny. Her actions held up as a chilling example of prejudice and callous disregard for both animal life and human disability. Willowbrook Glen, the formerly anonymous enclave of gracious living, found itself unwillingly thrust into the harsh national spotlight. Its carefully cultivated image of tranquil exclusivity irrevocably shattered, replaced by unwelcome notoriety. Ranger, against formidable odds and thanks to the aggressive, round-the-clock, expert care he received at the veterinary emergency hospital, miraculously survived the poisoning. The fight was long, arduous, and touch and go for several days. The veterinary bills were astronomical, eventually exceeding the cost of a well-equipped new car, a testament to the severity of the damage and the complexity of the treatment required. He was left with permanent, significant kidney damage, chronic renal insufficiency that would require careful lifelong management, prescription therapeutic diets, regular subcutaneous fluid administration, frequent blood work monitoring, and medications to manage secondary complications. His lifespan was likely shortened, but he pulled through. His resilience, his sheer will to live, a quiet testament to his strength and spirit. The bond between him and Evelyn, already profound, forged in the crucible of shared trauma in war zones and deepened by his unwavering loyalty and daily service, became something even deeper, something unbreakable, forged anew in the shared ordeal of his near-death experience and slow recovery. The legal case against Diane Schumacher proceeded swiftly and decisively through the justice system, faced with the irrefutable forensic evidence conclusively linking her purchase of the specific brand of antifreeze to the lethal poison found in Ranger's system and in the adulterated meatball. The compelling security footage placing her at the point of purchase just before the incident, the multiple witness statements detailing her escalating harassment and animosity, her own incriminating statements made during the police interview and subsequent arrest, and overwhelming public condemnation, leaving little room for jury sympathy. She had precious little viable defense. Her high-priced attorney attempted a half-hearted, almost desperate strategy, suggesting diminished capacity due to alleged obsessive-compulsive personality traits exacerbated by extreme stress related to her demanding and voluntary HOA duties, painting her as a misguided individual who simply snapped under pressure. The court, however, saw only calculated malice, premeditation, and a profound, disturbing lack of remorse. She was found guilty of felony aggravated animal cruelty by a jury after minimal deliberation. At the sentencing hearing, the judge delivered a powerful, emotionally charged statement, speaking not just of the immense, needless suffering inflicted upon Ranger, detailing the painful medical procedures he endured, but also addressing the profound violation of trust inherent in attacking a service animal, a living medical tool essential to the well-being and independence of a veteran coping with the invisible. Enduring wounds of war. Your actions, Miss Schumacher, the judge stated, looking directly at a pale, visibly trembling Diane, demonstrate a chilling lack of empathy, a frightening disregard for the law, and a profound disrespect for basic decency. You inflicted immense suffering on an innocent animal, and by extension, you attacked the stability, the safety, and the dignity of the owner, who relies on him not just for companionship, but for her very ability to navigate the world after serving this country with honor. This court must send an unequivocal message that such calculated cruelty, such targeted malice, will be met with significant, meaningful consequences. Diane Schumacher received a multi-year state prison sentence, substantial court-ordered fines, and was mandated by the court to pay full restitution for Ranger's extensive, ongoing veterinary costs, a staggering sum almost certain to require the forced liquidation of her personal assets, including the prized Willowbrook Glen house she had valued more than a life, more than compassion, more than the rule of law itself. Evelyn Reed, with Ranger slowly, steadily recovering by her side, his amber eyes still intelligent and watchful, though perhaps now carrying a new layer of weary wisdom and vulnerability, eventually returned to her demanding, vital work at the BAU. The ordeal had undeniably left deep scars, adding another complex layer to the tapestry of trauma she navigated daily, both personally and professionally. But it hadn't broken her. If anything, confronting such calculated malice so personally, experiencing the near loss of her indispensable canine partner, seemed to sharpen her already formidable professional focus, reinforcing her unwavering commitment to understanding the darkest corners of the human psyche and bringing those who deliberately inflicted harm upon the vulnerable, the innocent, the voiceless, to justice. Sometimes, sitting quietly at home in the evenings, the only sound the gentle, reassuring rhythm of Ranger's breathing as he slept peacefully, protectively, at her feet. Evelyn would watch the shadows lengthen across her lawn. The peace of Willowbrook Glen felt different now, irrevocably altered, less about the fragile illusion of enforced uniformity and superficial perfection, and more about the quiet, resilient, hard-won triumph of empathy over malice, of justice over prejudice. a victory hard won, day by day, against the insidious darkness that could hide, festering, behind even the most perfectly manicured lawns and rigidly enforced community rules. Ranger would occasionally lift his head, nudge her hand gently with his nose, his tail giving a slow, tentative thump-thump against the floor, a small, profound affirmation of survival, of loyalty, of the enduring, unbreakable power of the bond they shared, a bond that no amount of hatred, prejudice, or poison could ultimately destroy.